So, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming back to our second webinar. It's moving from early ID to early intervention with Dr. Susan Bashinsky. And I'm just going to do a couple quick reminders before I turn it over to Susan. I set the Zoom up the same way as last time. Everybody's microphones and webcams are off, and we're going to ask you to keep it that way unless there's a discussion or somebody asks you to turn them on. We do have interpreters today, and they will be spotlighted so that everybody can find them. And I also have captioning turned on for everyone. If you have questions, we would ask you to put those in the chat box again, and we will make sure to be checking that so that they don't get missed and Susan can have a chance to respond to them. I hope you all did the pre-test before coming into the session. If not, it is a link for that in your email. Maybe you could do it real quickly. And when we get done, you will be sent a link to an eval and a post test so that you can get your certificate. I know some people have had some trouble getting their certificates. I can and will send them again to you if you send me an email. Part of the time it's because they've turned up in somebody's spam filter. So you might want to check that before you say, hey, I didn't get it. But it's no problem because I will have a copy to send to you. So. Again, if you have any problems today, just let me know either in the chat box or by email or phone. I can put that in the chat box here for everyone in just a second so that you can contact me if there are problems with technical stuff or you need to ask a question off of the session. And I think everyone has all of the handouts and the PowerPoint. So if that's not the case, do send me a note about that too, and I'll resend those to you. I think that's really all I needed to say. So Susan, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get going.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. To those of you who participated with us 2 weeks ago, welcome back. I'm really grateful, as I said to you before, that you've chosen to spend a couple hours of your busy days with us. That's really important. And I just noticed that my computer is about ready to die. So I should have paid attention when Lisa was talking. And I don't know what's going on because I've had it plugged in. Let me check the attachment. Lisa, talk to them if you would, because I got to do this. Or I'm going to go do.
Okay, well, we can hang out and wait for that. We don't want you to stop in mid-sentence in the middle of this. So, okay.
I had it, sorry about that. I really am sorry. I had it plugged in all night, but my electricity went out because we're having storms and I guess it didn't get charged. I don't know what happened, but my apologies. So I seriously am glad you're here to be with us. And if I'd stay with you, it would be nicer, wouldn't it? I would thank Lisa again. And most of what we will do today would be standalone. If there happens to be anybody who wasn't able to make it 2 weeks ago, I will make references to a few of the main points we talked about 2 weeks ago, because that whole assessment block sets the stage for what we're going to do today. But don't worry, if you weren't able to attend, hopefully today will make sense. Just a couple other operational things. This is a repeat, but it's very important to me, so I want to repeat it anyway. Bear with me. Lisa did send the PowerPoint, and you should have 4 handouts for today. And we welcome you to share that information, the PowerPoint and the handouts, with families, with your teams. But if you choose to do that, please be sure to attribute credit to the Indiana Deafblind Project. And if you would keep my name associated with the materials as well, I would appreciate it. We want you to share, because if you think that anything I have to say to you today, or questions I pose to you today, might help somebody, then share it. We want you to, but the Indiana Deafblind Project is responsible for this, and they need to get the credit for organizing this for your professional development. So please work with us on that. We will have 2 periods today during the course of my talk where we'll stop and I'll say, Lisa, are there questions that have shown up in the chat? and we'll try to get those answered periodically. Then there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. And if we need to, we can go to live questions at the end. We'll just see how it goes. We'll plan about 10 minutes at the end for that. So with that organizational information, I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. And if somebody could tell me if you see this, it would make me really happy. I got to move some things because I can't get to the slideshow button. Slideshow from start. Can somebody tell me if you see my slides?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, Lisa. So one thing that I would like to do, it's a repeat from last time, but just in case there's somebody new or just to help remind me, if you just put your first name and your role on a team or in a family, if you're a mom, you're a dad, you're a speech path, you're a early interventionist, first steps person, if you just put that in the chat, I can feel like I'm more connected with you all, even though I can't take time to really meet you. And that's a regret of mine, but it's just part of what we deal with. So if you see me look in this direction, I'm looking at the chat to check out who's here. So I'm not trying to be rude. All right, let's go. So I want to begin again today, as we did a couple weeks ago, with sharing with you what I hope to address in our talk today. We'll again review the criticality of early intervention. I don't think I have to sell that to any of you that's taken your time to participate, because you chose to be in early intervention because you know it's important. You provide early intervention services because you know they're important. You know why they're important. But perhaps if we have some folks who don't work day to day in that, or we have some administrators or some families, we can help get all on the same page about it. We will very quickly, and I mean really quickly, look at legal requirements for intervention with little ones who are suspected of experiencing dual sensory loss or who have been identified as experiencing dual sensory loss. We will spend a lot of time, the majority of our time today will be spent with looking at recommended priorities and recommended practices for 3 primary environments in which early intervention services for kiddos with deaf blindness might occur. And I don't know how many of these environments each of you currently works in or has worked in, but there are possibilities for kids with deaf blindness. So we will talk about the NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. We will talk about in-home services, and we will talk about on-site preschool services, because although there are threads that are shared among those 3 environments, the priorities are different in each of them, and the way you can implement practices is very different. As you'd imagine, in a hospital, in somebody's home, and in a classroom, those contexts are entirely different. So we'll try to explore those. This is where you might be groaning, which is maybe it's good for me. I can't hear you right now. And thank you for populating the chat. I do appreciate that. I need mnemonics to help me remember things. So as I was planning this, I was trying to figure out how to aggregate the things about which I wanted to talk with you into categories and to come up with a way we could remember them. Well, I came up with T's, words that start with T's, for 3 of the 4, and then I couldn't figure it out. So it's a little bit lame right here. I get it. We're going to talk about touch, talk, tangibles, and oops, I had to get a T. So I said transport. It's really movement. But movement is a way to transport yourself from one place to another. And again, I don't know about you. Go ahead and groan. It's all right. 4 T's helps me remember things. So if you like mnemonics, maybe you can remember the 4 T's as well. We're also going to talk about the overarching importance of routines. This will be where we'll end up. If we don't have time to do it in detail, I'm not worried about that, because I'm guessing each of you knows at least a little bit and probably a lot about designing and implementing routines. And you have the PowerPoints. I think they're pretty self-explanatory, but if we have time, we'll talk about routines. I planned a little bit of time for that. So here we go. The first of the 4 handouts with which I provided you today is an action plan. And I did this before. I hope that maybe when you left the webinar 2 weeks ago, you had at least one thing written on your action plan. And I would hope that everybody can write at least one thing on your action plan of something, about which you want to talk with a colleague, about which you want to talk with a family, one thing you might want to look up on the web, one thing you might want to try in your practice. Again, I'm just projecting my own needs onto you because I don't know you. So that's all I can do, but I have to write things down if I ever want to follow up. So I've tried to provide you with a way to do that most easily. So early intervention. And I see many of you. We've got somebody who wasn't an early interventionist, lots of coordinators, but lots of first steps people are back. Lots of you are interventionists, so you could probably present this part as well or better than I can. But we just know we're going to get all in the zone right now. We're all going to get in the zone together that experiences during the earliest years of life have a very profound influence on a child's ability to learn, to move, to interact with others. You know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but we're getting together, we're establishing our frame from which we can build. This is especially true with young children who experience dual sensory loss because, as you know, and I think this is one of the real pieces of magic of early interventionists, you as a group, in my opinion, do a great job of realizing you have to work with a whole child because the physical development, the communication development, the social development, their cognitive development, their emotional development, all of those domains are incredibly intertwined, and you can't really isolate one. You need to look at the whole package. So we have to get our acts together and do early intervention with these kids because deafblindness is so impactful on a child's learning. And as we said last time in much more detail, deafblindness is impactful because it limits accessibility to the environment. And you all know you have to have access to the environment, meaning the physical environment, the social environment, other people in the environment, objects in the environment. You have to be able to access those things to learn about them, to learn from them, to learn with those people. And as we said in much more detail last time, deafblindness affects 2 of a child's 3 distance senses: vision, that you and I, use to get information about the world far beyond what we can reach. Our hearing, same, far beyond what we can reach. And we're limited, kids with deafblindness are much more limited to using their touch senses, which is taste and their tactile sense. And that really pulls in where they can get access. So we have to work to expand their access, and that's early intervention. Early intervention is positively correlated with a reduction in negative impacts. You know that because we are all about learning, and learning is gathering information from all those environmental aspects that I just enumerated a minute ago. So once again, we'll go back to Jan van Dyke that I talked about last time and just remind ourselves that when we are implementing early intervention services with a child who experiences deafblindness, we are becoming a partner. We are becoming partners with that little one, all right? And we're going to join with that little one to invite her outside of her own body to join us in this big physical, social world. And we're going to try to help her connect with that world, connect with that environment, and learn from it, right? And regardless of whether you're working in a NICU, as we're going to be talking about, or a home, or a preschool, it's really critical to remember that we're trying to invite the child out of her own body, because she might not see much beyond her own body. She may not hear much beyond her own body. We've got to invite her out into the world, and we need to remember that's what we're all about. Children with deafblindness are identified at many, many different ages. And we talked last time about Indiana's, and Lisa said this, I'm not dogging on her while she's not talking to you, that Indiana has struggled with identifying kids prior to age 2. We looked at the stats for Indiana's identification in the census last time, and we're trying to beef that up and identify kids earlier. Now, I'm not saying that if kids aren't identified by 2, we're just going to give up and we don't care about identifying them later. That's not right. One, some kids who ultimately will carry a label of dual sensory loss may not have demonstrated that prior to 2 years of age. They may not have demonstrated that when they're eligible for early intervention. They might not demonstrate that till they're 6 or 7 or 12 when there's an accident, an illness or something. And kids are identified at many, many different ages. But the reason we're focusing today on early ID and little bitty ones is because if we can identify those kids, because they exist, we look nationally at the figures, right? Between 5 and 6% of kids nationally on the census are identified before age 2. We can help them, we can help their families, we can expand their worlds. And so, as I said, we're going to look at the NICU, we're going to look at on-site preschool environments. One more time, this is the order in which we're going to go through these. So, when I start with NICU, we're going to talk about touching, we're going to talk about talking. And with talking, what I really mean is expressive communication. Talk might mean speech, all right? Talk might mean touch. Talk might mean, pardon me, not touch. I said that wrong. I'm sorry. That's a different one. Talk might mean manual sign, right? Talk might mean gesture, but it's some method of expression to the child. But again, I'm sticking with my T's. So we're going to talk about touch, which is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to talk about talk, which could be speech, manual sign, gesture, anything like that. It's a much broader category. We're going to talk about movement, which is connected to how the kid might transport herself, how the mom, the dad, the brother, the grandma the teacher might transport the child, but it's transport movement. And then we're going to talk about tangibles, which is pretty self-explanatory. We will look at those as a unit too. And you will see, I hope that as we go through the environments, you will compare which ones seem to be more important and how the applicability of touch, talk, transport, and tangibles changes from a NICU to an in-home program to an on-site preschool program. Hopefully that makes sense. So real quick, I said we're going to do this fast, and we're going to do this really fast to review what the legal requirements, and I'm talking about the federal special education law, because all states must comply minimally with the special education federal law. What the federal requirements are for providing services to kids who experience dual sensory loss. Birth to 3, that's up to age 3, those children who are deafblind are typically eligible for early intervention services under Part C. You guys are early interventionists. If you work with special ed early interventionists, you know about Part C. You connect with other people and provide special ed services under Part C. You know about that. But when kids reach the age of 3 years, they transition into special ed services under Part B of IDEA. And I know you know that Part C switches to Part B on kids' 3rd birthdays. And I'll bet you've had the same experience that I've had, that even if kids haven't for some reason been eligible for services prior to their 3rd birthday, because kids with with suspected disabilities in other categories don't qualify for services nearly as early as kids who are suspected of having deafblindness or who are identified with deafblindness. Those two groups are eligible from the moment they're identified or from birth, right? Okay. Other kids aren't eligible for SPED services till they hit 3 years of age. But by gosh, by golly, on their third birthdays, families are there enrolling them in Part B services. So we switch from Part C to Part B at the third birthday. And services under both Part C and B of the federal SPED law, IDEA, must be provided free of charge through the kid's public school system, regardless of whether the child attends an on-site program or not. Doesn't matter if the kid goes to an on-site preschool. If the kid is identified as experiencing deafblindness or is suspected of experiencing deafblindness, the school district is responsible for providing the in-home program or wherever services to wherever the child is. And again, I think I'm probably preaching to the choir because so many of you in this session are First Steps providers, as I see in the chat. So it's just a good review for all of us, I think, before we get into the nitty gritty. So Lisa, with that as kind of a beginning point, those are all the basic pieces before we get into the environments. I don't see any questions in the chat. Has anything come into you that we need to stop for a minute and address questions, or are we ready to move on?
I don't see anything either. I think you're good to go.
Good to go? All righty. We like that. We take the 5 extra minutes and use it somewhere else. So, general early intervention practices. And I think these are things that, in my opinion, in my professional opinion, apply regardless of the environment in which the services are provided. If you are going to be working with a little one with deafblindness or who is suspected of having deafblindness, you as a partner must, to optimize your effectiveness and optimize that child's learning, you really need to plan how a child will receive information in the activity. With so many of our children, kids in general, we don't have to focus so hard on how they're going to receive information because we assume they're going to see it. We make these bright, colorful audio visuals. We use technology. We use big books. We think they're going to see it. Well, with kids with deafblindness, maybe they are, maybe they're not. So we have to plan how they're going to receive information. We also have to plan what a child is going to do, how a child is going to respond in every activity to show us they understand what we're talking about. This is a little bit of a formal way to say it, to communicate. Sorry, I thought I had my phone turned off. That's not a good thing. To communicate, I don't mean that they're going to have to sign or speak, but it's like, what is the kid going to do with her body? What is the kid going to do with her emotions? What is the kid going to do to show you that she understands what you're telling her, that she understands and processes what you're showing her, that she's going to move closer to look at something, that she's going to climb on your lap, that she's going to turn away to go, I don't care about that. What is she going to do to show you that she has some understanding of the information you're presenting to her? So how's she going to get information from you? And what is she going to do to show you that she received that information? That's how we get that communication loop going and closing to make sure the information's getting in, how we know, and so we can take another turn to provide more information. This is so important because kids with deafblindness commonly do not receive and express information through the same channels. That becomes, I think, more dramatic as kids age up and they become more proficient at signing or at using other technologies. But little ones who've had a lot of early intervention services are pretty facile by the time they're 2 years old. So we need to remember they don't necessarily express and receive information through the same kinds of channels or through the same modes of communication. So plan how a kid's going to get information from you, plan how a kid is going to show you information received, got it, all right? And the way we do that is we consider the immediate environmental context. And by that, it's the immediate physical context, visual context, auditory context, and social context of every activity you plan. And as you well know, when you're working with little bitty kids in a half-hour period, you got lots of activities because their attention spans are rightfully so short. So you have to consider these physical, visual, auditory, and social environmental contexts for every single activity. It's a lot of planning. It's a lot of work, but it's the way you're going to maximize your instruction. It is important, and again, regardless of environment, NICU, in-home, on-site preschool, doesn't matter. It's important to remember that children who experience deaf blindness are very, very, very often unable to predict what's going to happen next. They lack ability to anticipate what's going to happen next until you teach them. Can they learn this? Absolutely. Why is structure important? Why is consistency important? Why is routine important? Ding, ding, right? To help them learn to anticipate that if A happens, then B is going to happen, right? But without that teaching and that foundational instruction, kiddos are not going to automatically learn to anticipate or predict. With toddlers, with toddlers and babies who don't experience dual sensory loss, they plug in real quickly through incidental learning to realize that when they hear the garage door going up at the end of the day and the kitchen door slam from the garage, mama or daddy are coming home from work, and they get all excited because they know those are associated with mama or daddy coming home from work. Well, kids who experience deaf blindness, they don't have those channels available to them oftentimes to incidentally learn those things, so they can't predict that when the water's running in the bathtub, I get to take a bath, which I love because of the sound, or because of these environmental sounds or these environmental events when mama's putting all the dishes on the table, or big sister's putting all the dishes on the table, and big brother's getting the high chair that it's going to be time to eat. They don't get those cues, so they can't anticipate that it's going to be dinner time. And so they're caught off guard oftentimes by these environmental events. And that can be stressful. That can be upsetting. They don't have time to set themselves and say, okay, Susan, get ready. You're going to go eat, because they can't anticipate, they can't predict till you help them learn how to do that. And that's a foundational principle in all the things that we're going to go over for the rest of this webinar. It's also important to remember that many kids with deaf blindness are deprived of many of the most basic extrinsic motivations that spark curiosity, right? Like if kids who don't experience vision and hearing loss see something flash in the environment or see something run by, they're like, what was that? And they might crawl over there or walk over there or roll over there to see what it was. Or they hear a funny sound. They might get scared by it. They might go, I wonder what that was. I want to go explore and check it out. Kids with deaf blindness very well might not do that. Again, it depends on how severe their sensory loss is, but I think we need to remember that it's likely if kids are identified this young, their sensory information is so distorted, it becomes ineffective as a source of motivation. Maybe not totally ineffective, but we can at least say it becomes much lesser effective as a source of motivation to explore the environment, to interact with people in the environment. And that is so critical to how kids who are typically developing learn, right? Again, you know that. You're the early intervention specialist. That's how kids learn, is those curiosities and those motivations through environmental temptation. And many kids with deaf blindness don't have those things available to them. Finally, many kids with deafblindness will not benefit from being left alone for long periods of time, even if they've got the coolest toys and materials. If you put them all around the child, if you leave them alone for very long, it's probably not going to go very well, because either they don't have the skill to interact independently with them, they don't get enough feedback from them, whatever is going on. They just need a partner to help them process and benefit from those learning materials. So hopefully that makes sense. And these characteristics relevant to learning, and these things about what a partner needs to do, all of these, I believe, equally apply to the 3 environments that we're going to explore in detail, starting right now. Okay, early intervention. Let's look at the NICU, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. And we'll go in this order. We're going to talk about touch, talk, transport, and tangibles. The priorities. We have to start with priorities, right? Because they are different. And obviously, some of you may be groaning, but this is really true. I know that if you've worked with any kids with deafblindness, you've experienced this. I know Lisa's experienced this. I've experienced this. Above all else, when you're working with a family, or you become aware of a family with a new baby with deafblindness, the priority number 1 is keep that baby alive. I shared with you a story 2 weeks ago about a family whose new infant son had been in the NICU literally for months and months and months and months. He had CHARGE syndrome and a bunch of other complicating medical issues. And you know what an early interventionist, you or I, could do to benefit that child's long-term learning really was second or third or fourth place, because they were trying to keep him alive. And I'm not trying to be crude, but if he's not alive, it really doesn't matter what his learning is going to look like in 5 years, because he wouldn't be there to take advantage of it. And again, I'm not trying to be crude, but it's just common sense. So we have to take a back seat. You know that. If you've ever worked in a NICU, you will know that by the way you are received, okay? But medical concerns absolutely must take priority over developmental concerns. We know that. And if anybody would say, which is more important, every one of us, every one of you on this webinar would say the medical. But sometimes when we get a plan and we get there with our stuff and we know what we want to do with the mama and that baby today, and then we can't do it, it's frustrating. And it is frustrating, especially if you've created a whole bunch of materials and you've got this plan and you didn't go see your own child's, you didn't go to your own child's holiday party so you could go do this with this baby, and then it all blows up. It's frustrating. It is frustrating. And we just need to remember it's all about keep the baby alive and how we can support that. Sometimes we can't do a lot, but sometimes we can. Other priorities for NICU intervention: keep the baby alive, assist the baby to gain weight. And we can help families with that, with helping families deal with stress, not stressing them with what we're talking about. We can help them deal with stress. We talked about this last time, so I'm not going to go on a long harangue about it today. But when you're talking with a family about developmental milestones, particularly for a baby that may end up in the NICU for weeks and weeks or months at a time, the parent may start, especially if the parent is an educator or education adjacent as a professional or has other children, that parent might want to talk to you about developmental milestones. Well, he's not holding his head up, and he's not, you know, making eye contact, or he's not tracking like we looked at last time. And, you know, when you're talking about developmental milestones with the family, you want to share with them that it's important to calculate the true birth age, not the day they were born, in the case of a baby born very prematurely. And this is an issue in the field of deafblindness, because the second most common cause of deafblindness that's identified in young children is extreme prematurity. And you'll get very different answers if you look at true birth age as opposed to day born. in regard to those very early developmental milestones. And that's a way you can take stress off a family, by helping them understand that. So I hope that that might be helpful to you in the future. Other things we can do as a priority, I believe, and we can do this, is even if we can't work hands-on with a baby in a NICU, but we can connect with a family, just to let the family know, hey, we're here as soon as little Jimmy is well enough and healthy enough where we want to start working with him and with you. And we're excited about that. But in the meantime, is there anything we can help you with, like understanding the developmental milestones? But you can support that family to deal with it has to be an emotional overload. It has to be an information overload. I'm sure some of you have had the opportunity to interact with a family, maybe it's your own family, and if it was, I'm sorry. Hopefully you had a good outcome. A family whose baby's in the NICU, and they just want to cry because they're scared to death of what's going to happen. And just to give them somebody to talk to that's not a medical professional, that's not overloading them with this, that, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's a bleed, maybe the stats are too low, maybe, just to help with that information overload. Maybe we can help them interpret some things. You can help reassure them about bonding with the baby. Maybe you can give them hints about bonding with the baby, and just help them try to figure out how to organize care for their other kids or manage their employment or whatever their responsibilities are. That is a priority in a NICU when we're talking about a newly identified baby with deafblindness, is just trying to start putting supports in place for the family, because the family needs those things desperately when they have been thrust into this new world of deafblindness and their baby's very, very premature or sick or both. So here we go. Touch, NICU intervention. And I've tried to repeat the environment under each of touch, talk, transport, and tangibles, so we keep track of where we are. All right. Babies born early, especially those that are called or described as extremely preterm, that's sooner than 28 weeks in the pregnancy, they are at higher risk for sensory loss. And if you've done much studying at all about the biology behind all of this, that makes sense to you, because the auditory and visual sensory systems are the last to fully mature. And I don't mean they're the last organs. The lungs are very late to fully mature, but I'm talking about the sensory channels, visual and auditory, mature much later than taste, smell, and touch. All right. And with medical science and all the advances that have been made, I think every one of you on this call knows at least one person, and again, maybe you've lived this journey, that has had a baby prior to 28 weeks of age, and those babies survive. 50 years ago, many of those babies didn't survive, but now they do. And we are here to try to make their lives as rich and as full as possible. And there's lots of little babies that are born before 28 weeks of age that years in the future, you'd never know they were that premature, and they're typically developing in every way, but they start at a disadvantage, right? And many of the kids who are born extremely preterm do experience deafblindness. Not all, but many. The tactile system, the touch system, is typically the first sensory system to mature. So we need to take advantage of touching in the NICU. Now, there are caveats. We're going to talk about those, okay? But we need to do everything we can. And even if it's just vicariously, we need to coach mom, we need to coach dad to take advantage of touching with that preterm baby, because the tactile system interacts with and the tactile system impacts every other sensory system. 2 weeks ago, when I was talking about visual development, auditory development, a statement I made each time was, and how this sensory system interacts with the other sensory systems, right? We have to be sensitive to that, because the tactile system does interact with and impact all the other senses. So here I am on this slide. I'm really trying to beg you to use touch and encourage families to use touch, but there's always a but, right? But we need to remember that some premature babies will absolutely demonstrate tactile defensiveness. They've been in this protected environment of the womb, and now they're out in the world, and all these lights and all this air and all these noises and all this stuff, and then people are touching them. It's like blah. They may be very tactily defensive. We have to be sensitive to that, or we're just working against ourselves, right? You know that. So touch, okay? Even if the tiny baby is in an incubator, I would encourage you to encourage the families to touch them as often as possible, to get your hands in there, to touch that baby as often as possible. But there's the but again, but be sensitive to the baby's response. And if the baby seems to react like, blah, what is that? Or cry, or gets more agitated, or pulls away if she's able to do that movement independently, provide that baby frequent breaks. Be sensitive to how the baby reacts when you touch. Now, obviously, this baby right here, right now, this baby's fine with this touch because the baby's leaving her hand on the finger, on daddy's finger, and doesn't seem to be objecting to it, right? But you have to be sensitive to how the baby responds to the touch, because it's not only emotional. Many premature babies, or very, very premature babies, will have very delicate skin. So you can't grab a hold, and you can't be firm. You have to touch gently. And there's a sweet spot. You don't want to touch too gently, because that can freak people out. Even if you touch me, it's like a feather touching you. That's kind of freaky, right? But touch gently, touch frequently, touch often, but be sensitive to how the baby responds to the touch. One of my favorite things that I've coached families to do, and you may like this, you may not, and that's okay, but it's an example. It's not the only way that this could happen, but it's the idea of you can start to use touch in more systematic ways to begin to let the baby know who is touching her, right? And lots of people in a NICU may be able to touch a baby periodically, like at one visitation point each, or I don't know how different hospitals run it. In the NICUs in which I've worked, there's a lot of similarities, but there are differences as well. But when mama's going to kiss the baby, have mama always kiss her on her cheek, on her right cheek. And when daddy's going to kiss the baby, have him kiss her on the tip of her nose. Or if there's too many tubes, have him kiss her on the top of her forehead, or the top of her head. And brother or grandma, or have them kiss her on the back of the hand. Point is, it's not these locations that are important. It's the idea of a unique location associated with each person. Mom's always going to kiss in the same place, which is going to be different than dad's going to kiss, which is going to be different than brother or grandma's going to kiss, because this is a way to begin to put information into that baby's brain that this is mama. Mama says hi. Mama says love you. Those words don't mean anything to that baby in that NICU, right? But over time, the prosody of the way you say it, this is mama, love you, the that can have an identifier that's always going to be with when I get kissed right here. And it can begin, it's not going to fully do anything, but it can begin to shape this identity of who's mom and who's dad. And these are different people, to begin to cue that baby. Oh, there's different things and people out there in the world. And that strategy is called a personal identifier. And as you'll see when we get into the preschool environment, I'll talk about personal identifiers with objects too. But this is a personal identifier with touch you can use in a NICU. And I hope that, again, if it's appropriate, you might consider it. All right, touch. Let's go to the second T. Talk. And remember, talk could be sign, talk could be speech, talk could be gesture. In the NICU, it's primarily verbal speech. Excuse me. Primarily, talk refers to the family and the professionals talking to the baby, to that new baby. But I also would caution you to take care to pay attention to how you talk with the family as well. Babies who require NICU care are at a greater risk for hearing loss than babies who don't require NICU. But I think the bigger issue when you're talking about a NICU, even if a child has passed or failed that newborn hearing screening about which we spoke last time, hearing abilities are often uncertain. And at best, hearing demonstration of hearing ability is often inconsistent when babies are in the NICU. And part of that's just the environment, because those environments can be noisy and bright and sensory overloaded for sure. So that's part of the reason I think it's important to talk, is because we don't know. That sounds maybe a little bit silly, but when you don't know if the kid can hear you or not, you talk, because you want that input if the child can hear all or part of it. But there are some guidelines, and these would be some that I would suggest you consider. You want to especially try to talk with the baby when she appears to be calm. You remember when we looked at the child guided assessment last time, one of the variables was behavior state, and that was the state of awake or alertness or sleepiness, drowsiness, agitation. So when that baby looks to be calm and looks to be alert, especially try to talk during that time. When the baby is particularly agitated, I would generally suggest you don't rely on talking, you refrain from that, you attempt to interact with touch. This one is especially important. I would just strongly encourage you to avoid what I call verbal diarrhea. It's the kind of thing that you hear say, "Mom is here, honey, Mom is here, I'm here, how are you? Did you have a good night? Oh, you look so tired. Oh, you got all these tubes. I'm so worried about you, but we love you and we want you to come home and I can't wait till you come home." And blah, 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 blah. Stop. It's too much. That's too much for babies who don't experience deaf blindness. That's too much for preschoolers who experience deaf blindness. You want to use telegraphic language. You want to find those key words. You want to focus on them. You want to think about the melody with which you speak. You want to say, "Mama's here. Love you." Whatever it is that, Daddy's here. Pick you up. I mean, you don't just because it's too much. It's not going to help, and it can hurt. It can make the baby stop attempting to listen to you. Make an effort to use some keywords consistently. As I said, consider using melodic talk or music. Even then, you can read very simple books to the baby. Encourage the parents to read simple books to the baby. You'd think of that because you encourage families to do that when they're pregnant, right? Let's talk about transport. And especially in the NICU, this is really associated with movement. You need to expect, we all need to expect that very, very often, if a baby's in a NICU, that baby may not be removed. Pardon me, if the baby's in an incubator, the baby may not be removed from that incubator in order to participate in something with a parent. And obviously, if a baby's in an incubator, we as teachers or speech paths or whoever we are, we're not going to go in there and yank a baby out of an incubator. We always can ask the question, but we have to expect they may not be able to come out of the incubator. All right. But if the NICU staff approves, a parent might gain permission to gently move the whole incubator to create some movement. And I don't mean, grab that incubator and swing it around, but like rock the incubator like you would rock in a rocking chair, or move it back and forth in different planes of space. And I don't mean swing that sucker, right? But just barely move it this way and then barely move it this way to try to create some movement for the baby. So the baby's not just lying there in this static state all the time. Would that necessarily translate directly into certain outcomes educationally? We don't know. There's nothing to which we could point specifically, but the research seems to indicate that stimulation of the brain, of the body, can help to promote vestibular development, can help to promote brain development. So if it's approved, if the NICU staff approves, just do some gentle movement. It's not going to hurt the baby if it's a gentle 1 or 2 inch movement. And when you're moving that incubator, it should be paired with talk. Now here's a big if. The last transport is if the baby can be, maybe, removed from the incubator, would encourage you to encourage the family to engage in very gentle, rhythmic movement while touching the baby. And that could be rocking, swaying side to side, cuddling, patting the baby's bottom, whatever it is. Gentle, rhythmic, consistent movement. And when you pick the baby up or put the baby down, to consistently do it in exactly the same way and label it somehow. Give it a name. Go up, pick up, here we go. I don't care what it is, but whatever you're going to do, they are going to do. Come up with a label and always label it the same way. So you're going to pair your touching with talk. You're going to pair your movement with talk. So let's look at tangibles. All right, this is our last variable for the NICU environment. It's fairly common in my experience. Haven't worked in NICUs in Indiana, so maybe this will not apply to you, but it is fairly common for a hospital to not allow tangibles to be introduced in the NICU environment or in the baby's incubator, especially early after the child's birth. In those instances, the family might inquire if they are able to hold the baby periodically, if they're able to take the baby out of the incubator or whatever periodically, to encourage the family to ask if they might use some kind of tangible during the time they're allowed to hold the baby. And then they're setting it up that then as the baby advances in terms of health and stability and starts gaining weight, that maybe the family would allow something to be introduced into the incubator. Then the family could use that thing they've been introducing when they held the baby. They could put that thing in the incubator for that consistency for the baby's security and development. If the hospital will allow a tangible to be with the baby in the incubator or in the layette or wherever the baby is, kinds of things you might encourage families to think about would be some small garment or some piece of fabric that has mama's smell on it, because the baby's used to that smell. Or if there's a soft, cuddly toy, I love this, the rabbit's as big as the baby, a cuddly toy that eventually might be used for the baby's comfort. Right now, is this providing any comfort for this baby? I think we could almost say with 100% assurance, no. But it's getting introduced, it's becoming familiar, and maybe someday that could be used for comfort. So tangibles have very limited applicability in the NICU, and they become incredibly important as we move into the home and preschool environments, as you will see. That's one of the things that really changes. So that closes our session on NICU. Let's take a look at the considerations for an in-home environment, and then we'll see if you have some questions. I don't see any questions yet. So let me do the next section, Lisa, unless you've got some questions pressing. Yes, no?
Nope.
Okay, we're good.
Nothing.
We'll do the in-home. And then we'll stop and see if people maybe have some questions when you have that contrast. And we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna look at in-home interventions. We'll start with priorities and then we'll go through touch, talk, transport, tangibles, just as we did before. And I'm trying to build on what we introduced in the NICU. Now it may be, and I realize this, that you may be for the first time introduced to working with a family in an in-home environment. You did not go into a NICU, or the baby didn't go into a NICU, and that's fine. But some of the considerations remain different, regardless of whether that child had that first experience in a NICU or not. So priorities for in-home intervention. In my personal opinion, and I think the literature supports this, one of the most important things early interventionists can do, and I'm guessing many, if not all of you do this anyway, is just to try and promote the family's confidence. Try and promote the family's competence in that they can care for this child. They can care for this young child with deaf blindness who's been so sick, or who has all these other potential disabilities, or who can't see very well and can't hear very well. That's scary. It's really scary. It's scary for the moment. It's scary for the future. And families need you to lean on to build their confidence and their competence. It's important to try and just support the family's function and just try to strengthen that relationship between the family and the child as you watch, as you're in their homes. You know, if you notice that they've rearranged the furniture to allow the baby to be on the floor in the living room where the family watches TV or plays video games, praise them for that and explain how it's so great they've made accommodation to allow the baby to be with the rest of the family. Or that if every time you're there they say, oh, I need to feed her, it's time to feed her now, and you know they consistently do that at 1:30, praise them for that consistency and let them know how much they help. And just try, the families need as much support from you at this stage with a young child with deaf blindness as that little baby does. You want to work with the family to modify their home environment, to adapt their home environment so that the child will have fuller access to be able to participate with the family, potentially learn from the home, those kind of things that I cited in my examples. So here we go. Touch. When you're working with a youngster at home, a youngster who has deaf blindness or is suspected of having deaf blindness, it is absolutely critical to remember that for a young child who experiences deaf blindness, his hands might not only be tools, but his hands become his eyes. His hands become his ears. His hands may become his voice or his communication mode. His hands become his self-stimulation avenue. His hands are other things. His hands help him protect himself. His hands can be all of these things. So we don't necessarily, pardon me, always only want to touch his hands. It's a silly thing to say, but it's like, if you're always grabbing the kid's hands, it's like you're poking me in the eye, or you're covering up my ears. No, because his hands are his eyes and his ears, very likely. So we have to think about that and remind ourselves, if you are talking to a person who can see and hear in typical ways, you're not covering up their eyes, you put your fingers in their eyes, you're not covering up their ears. And that's what we essentially are doing if we're always just touching that baby, that youngster's hands. We want to try to assist families to develop touch cue systems, like that system I explained in the NICU, that mama kisses here, daddy kisses here, grandma kisses in another place. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be kissing. It can be always it could be a stroke. It could be a pat. It could be a kiss. It's get an identifier, always do it the same way. And again, it doesn't have to be in those locations. Those are just some I picked out, but it's a unique location for each unique person to cue the baby. This is grandma, this is daddy. That's so important. And you pair it with speech so that the kids can begin to understand. And if you have, as you kids get older and you get confirmation they can't hear and mama kisses here, she might pair it with the sign from mom, and pair it with sign as well as with speech. My guess is if you've done any work with deaf blindness at all, this is not a new concept to you. We used to, in blindness, we used to talk about hand over hand or total physical assistance, but the preferred strategy is hand under hand. You use your hand under the child's hand, such as is shown in this picture right here. It's not child, but it's a young adult. This is the provider, the parent. Hand is under the child's hand to guide that child's hand from underneath. And the reason this is so much preferred to the hand over hand model, if this kid wants to escape, it's easy. He just removes his hand. If this kid wants to explore this adult's hand, it's easy. He's not restricted in any way. He can move his hand around her thumb. He can move his hand down here, feel this separated little finger. He can move his hand wherever he wants. He can actively participate. Whereas if it's reversed, and if you've never tried this, try it sometime. If you're with somebody, you can try it right now. But if the adult's hand is over the child's hand, it's much harder for the kid to get away. It's much harder for the kid to explore, especially if the adult is trying to guide the child from overhand. So it's all about hand under hand when we're touching. And it's important to think about joint tactile attention. I know you all in your practice, you talk about joint attention, and it typically means joint visual attention. Well, when we don't know if kids see, we don't know how well they see, or we know they don't see very well, you're not going to go with joint visual attention. You're going to go with joint tactile attention. And so you explore an object together. You explore textures together. You explore a person's face together. Touch, home intervention. Body language is a two-way street. I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. And it's just so important. I think that we, as early interventionists, when we pick up a baby, a toddler, a little one, we take a lot of cues from their muscle tone. If they go rigid on us, we go, whoa, something, he doesn't like something. Or if they get lax on us, they drop down to the floor. We can feel the clamminess or the coolness of their skin. We can feel their respiration rate. We take a lot of cues from kids' body language. And I'm here just to remind you that little one, even if they can't sign to you to explain it, they can't talk to you to go, well, I see your respiration rate just went up, Susan. Are you nervous about helping me? They can't do that. I know that, but they notice. They notice differences. They notice differences in our body if we're tense. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have at some point said, they know if a person is confident or not. Those little kids know if somebody who's working with them feels like they know what they're doing and is in control, or if they're a novice and they're nervous and they don't know what's going on. Kids know. Well, this is how they know. And when you are touching them with hand under hand, kids can get a lot of information from the texture of the person's skin, from the size of the other person's hands. I mean, think about it. I got giant hands, but my hands on a little child's hands are very different than a sister's hands, or than grandma's hands, or daddy's hands. People's hands feel different. The texture of our skin, the size of our hands, the temperature. My hands are always cold, all right? They'd know as me because the hands are always cold. How we apply pressure, all of these can be identifiers, and we need to just be aware of that. How can we change it? We can't necessarily, but I think we need to be aware of it and lean into it, if you will, and use what we can to our advantage, all right? And I would say this last one is the most important point. And then I say things like that and I go, oh, Susan, you always say this is the most important point, but I really believe this one is always, 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 always show respect for the way in which you touch a young child. Always show respect for the way you touch any learner. You want respect, they deserve respect. Be kind, be gentle, be respectful. Enough said. You don't need me preaching at you. So let's look at talk. Again, talk could mean manual sign. It could mean gesture. It could mean any way you're expressing to the child, right? Okay. We want to develop supports for increasing that little child's ability to get information. Remember, we said partners have to worry about how kids are going to get information about the world and the environment. So we're going to engage in non-traditional conversations, and that's coming up. We'll get to that. If hearing ability remains uncertain, or if the kid has a diagnosed hearing loss, it is absolutely critical to supplement verbal speech with gestures and or manual signing. You have to gotta do it. Obviously, I think you realize if you know there's a hearing loss, you would do these things. But what I'm suggesting to you is if you're uncertain about the status of a child's hearing, supplementing with gesture or manual sign is very, very important. One thing that I would suggest to you, you consider, and we're not going to spend much time on this today. We could do 2 hours on this dictionary. This is a project. This is from a project on which Lisa and I worked together 20 years ago. And I'm still believing in it. So Lisa can help you with this. And I'm willing to, but Lisa can help you with this, is to create a signal dictionary or a gestural dictionary that all partners who interact with that baby, that toddler, that young child will use. It shows them to what to react, how to interpret its meaning, what the partner is going to do, what the partner is going to say, and how the partner is going to try to shape the little one's behavior to a more conventional signal. All right. Because this promotes consistency. All right. And this is going to enrich the input a learner gets, which then can facilitate that child's expressive development, expressive communication development later. Let's just look at one example. If I'm Susan, the little one with suspected deafblindness at this point, if I'm physically pulling a person over in the direction of something else, everybody that I yank on, okay, is going to interpret that to mean, please come interact with me. I want you to do something with me. So all of my partners that I'm yanking on will give me attention, and they will attempt to show me what you think I'm pulling you toward. If you think I'm pulling you toward this phone, then you're going to show me the phone, and you're going to say or sign, okay, you want to look at something. And you're going to demonstrate a more conventional gestures, like maybe trying to shape what I'm doing to a point, or shape what I'm doing to put my hand out, so that I'm not just yanking on you all the time. There's some other examples. You have them in the PowerPoint, but these signal dictionaries are a great way to implement talk in a home environment and also in an on-site preschool environment. As I say, Lisa and I did this in a project together. She can help you and I can help you. This is just a taste of one thing you might do. Transport. Movement. Again, this is broad. It's my lame 4Ts. I know it. Grown again. It's okay. You want to do what you can to assist family members to read the baby, the toddler's various movements and body signals. That also is going to help you if you're creating this kind of a dictionary. When the baby does these things, well, you have to know what those things are, right? It might be a change in heart rate, respiration rate. If the kid's making himself gag, kid is hyperextending, flailing, changing body position, grimacing, smiling, laughing, whatever it is, help families know that's their best way to communicate with the child at that point in time. So to read those things, because, hey, Those overt behaviors are that child's communication signals at that point in his development. They need to be treated like communicative attempts. They need to be interpreted as communicative attempts. They're so important. One thing we talked about 2 weeks ago, it is critical that we always remember that many of the earliest memories a child who experiences deafblindness will have are those associated with touch and with movement, which is why we want to infuse movement in so much we do. And we want to pair movement with touch because it's those two things that help build a foundation of memory for that young child. Again, as we said, the general principles, young children who experience deafblindness frequently are not motivated by interesting things in the environment because they can't see them or hear them. Right? We have to project and teach them about motivation and anticipation. Their own body awareness might be super limited. Spatial awareness is likely not developing well. Reaching, they're not reaching because they don't realize there's something for which to reach, right? And it can be real challenging if kids also have motor challenges, motor disabilities. So you're going to have to nurture those things and develop spatial awareness. And you all know as early interventionists how important spatial sense and spatial awareness is to future development. I copied the same picture from 2 weeks ago because I love it. We talked briefly about movement. Van Dyke, who was viewed as one of the pioneers in the field of deafblindness, he proposed coactive strategies. I said earlier we were going to talk about that. Coactive strategies, frequent use of touch, but they also involve what are called joint motor activities. And here it says between the parent and the child, it can be between the teacher and the child, the early interventionist and the child, and this would be a coactive movement. Pick up your foot, put it down. Pick up this foot, put it down. Rock back and forth together. You can be rocking on the floor and rocking together. You can be sitting in a rocking chair and rocking together. If it's joint motor movement together with you and a child, it's called a coactive strategy. I think it's what a lot of good mothering of young children involves. We just don't label it this way, but you need to be aware that, or you'll be benefited from being aware that's a coactive movement strategy because that helps develop a child's sense of security. It helps build relationships with others, that mom, that grandma, that care provider, that nanny, that daddy. And for kids with deafblindness, it also helps them to learn how to interpret environmental cues. Okay. So the last one, as far as home intervention, and then we'll stop and see if we've got questions, Lisa. Tangibles. These provide little ones with novel, interesting objects to explore. And as you know, part of your business is to encourage young kids to try new things. Yes, you want them to be able to repeat their favorite activities, and you're going to, scaffold your intervention with some favorite activities, but you also want kids to try new things. With kids with deafblindness, you also need and want to facilitate reaching, to facilitate moving, to facilitate taste and smell and touch. And so it's important you ensure the environment is safe, right? Because the baby, the toddler has to feel secure, and you're going to start with familiar environments to make that happen. But you then want to branch into more unfamiliar things. Excuse me. Just kind of two of the standards of toys you might see. You want to develop supports to maximize the child's ability to use whatever vision skills he has left, whatever auditory skills he has left. Because most kids, as we said last time, at least 95%, it is estimated, 95% of kids identified as having deafblindness have some vision and or hearing ability that can be functional. So whatever they can still hear or see, we want to maximize. So help kids learn to purposefully touch to explore, and you want to choose your objects carefully. These are just two examples. And you want to then think to the possibility of taking parts of these, like a lever off of a broken toy, or a button off of this toy, or the ball off of this toy, can later be used as object cues for that child. So you're kind of setting the stage for further expansion of an educational program. So we're ready to do on-site preschool. Since we've talked about NICUs and in-home, Lisa, before we go to the third environment, you have any questions?
There is one question. They say, any tips for guiding hands towards items when the child has challenges with tone or other involuntary movements?
Well, that's a great question. That's a great question, Kirby. I think you're the OT that asked some questions last time. A couple of thoughts. One is, as you've worked with that child, you should have been paying attention to noticing what position or in what positions the child seems to have the most relaxed tone. So you want to use that position where the tone seems to be most relaxed, kind of as your base, and go from there. If there's a couple positions, in which the tone seems more relaxed, do the reaching activities, do the tactile exploration activities from that position. Maybe if you notice the child seems to feel most secure or most relaxed when you're holding that child, then only do the reaching when you're holding that child. You can also do, in consultation with a PT, OT, you can get some ideas for relaxation, and I mean muscle relaxation, kind of exercising, if it's some massaging or whatever it is, to do a little bit of that before you start with the reaching activities or the stretching activities sometimes. But you'd have to talk, I would encourage everybody, before you do what I'm going to say next, talk to a PT, because it just depends what's behind the involuntary movement. With some causes of involuntary movement, like if the child's arm is moving, if you hold the arm down, like with your arm, it's not going to exacerbate the movement. So you can inhibit the movement with your own body. So then you can explore with the child with the other hand, and that can work. But there are certain causes of this movement that if you hold it down, you're just going to make it worse. You're going to strengthen that movement. So don't do that without talking to a physical therapist. It's just like with kids who have spastic cerebral palsy. If you work to try to extend an arm, you're just increasing the spastic reflex. So you don't want to do that without conversation with the motor specialists on your team. But I think you can look to inhibiting movement, possibly doing some relaxation exercises or movement, just soothing rocking of the child, just to try to calm them down, maybe calm yourself down too a little bit, look at your own internal state, and then to choose positions accordingly. Glad you think that helped. Thank you for letting me know. Anything else, Lisa?
I don't see anything else.
Okay, let's hit the third environment. Thank you all. It's a great question, Kirby. Same order. We're going to do priorities. Then we're going to do touch, talk, transport, tangibles. Here we go. Priorities with on-site preschool. My guess is this is where most of you have had the bulk of your experience. So some of this, if I say things, I'm not trying to insult you. Please don't be insulted. I'm just trying to highlight things that I think are the most important. So if the things you do, go yay me and pat yourself on the back. Okay. The thing we're all about with on-site preschool is to work collaboratively with the family. That's a priority. To work collaboratively with all the professionals on the team and develop a meaningful, functional, individual family services plan. Boom. That's what we need to do. And so to do that, we need to actively solicit information from all these people, especially from the family. The kid lives with the family. The family knows that child better than we will ever know that child. And then share information back with them and with other key providers. Again, you know this. We want and need to create environments that provide opportunities for movement, that provide opportunities for regular physical activity. And as you do as early interventionists, think of that whole child, and you want to promote development across all those major domains. A preschool priority is to expand that young child's world. And I think this last one is critical, to expand the number of people with whom she can meaningfully communicate. And especially with kids with deafblindness, increasing the number of partners is really hard. But you need and want to increase the number of people who can understand what that child's body is saying, what that child's movements and overt behaviors are saying, and how you as other people can get information meaningfully into that child. Another super benefit of on-site preschool, you've probably preached this to many families yourself, is you provide opportunities for that little one to interact with peers. And you all know how important peer interaction is for social development, emotional development. So important for kids with deafblindness too. Harder, oftentimes harder, so that the other kids don't treat the kid with deafblindness as a doll or as a thing. They need to treat that child with deafblindness as just another kid. And that you may be laughing, but that happens. And that's a hard one to overcome. Priorities for on-site preschools: identify each child's strengths, preferences, interests to engage that child in active learning. There's your job description right there, right? Build a foundation for literacy development, build a foundation for academic development. Ching, ching, you know that. But we need to remind ourselves, that's what this is all about. Strengths, preferences, interests, build a foundation for academic learning, build a foundation for future literacy learning, build a foundation for learning from regular school, right? So here we go with touch. I encourage you to become aware of the learner's skin and the learner's muscle tone, and to pay attention to the kind of touches she initiates. How does the child use touch? Maybe she initiates touch with all kinds of objects, but not with other people. Maybe she initiates touch with things that are rough or kinky hair, but nothing that's smooth or soft. Whatever it is, pay attention to how that child uses touch. Does she use touch hard, that she only hits and squeezes? Or does she use touch gently? How does the child use touch? She could be telling you how she likes to be touched. And I'm not saying, yeah, beat the kid around. I'm not saying that. But if she touches hard, it may be that she wants a deep pressure touch. She likes firm touch, not this wimpy, gentle touch. Pay attention. Determine how the learner uses her hands. Determine for what purposes the learner uses her hands, because you're going to take cues from how the child touches, how she uses her hands, for what purposes. Oh, child-guided assessment, right? We talked about that a lot 2 weeks ago. And the reason you're doing this is then you are going to follow that child's lead. As I said, if she touches hard, then you're going to touch her firmly and see how it goes. It might be a mistake, okay? But it's a great starting place. You want to create a physical environment that includes a lot of interesting textures and tactile features. I think that's typical preschool classrooms. And you want to use touch to encourage that young child to engage with other kids, to come out of her body and engage not only with you as a teacher, but to engage with the other kids as well. I think it's really important to create and implement consistent tactile means for securing that child's attention. If you're always going to get her attention by flashing the lights, then always get her attention. If you're going to sometimes do that, then always do that. If that doesn't work because she doesn't see well enough, if you're always going to try to get her attention by calling her name, then always do that. But maybe that won't work. So always touch her in a certain way, in a certain place, with a certain firmness, with a certain hand shape, with a certain number of touches, whatever it is. Consistent tactile means to get her attention, to facilitate her discrimination skills, and to just teach differential responses. Be consistent, because we don't know. We don't know what's working and what's not working with any reliability when these kids are little bitty and they're first coming to school. We can use touch as a formal cue for understanding people and activities in our environment, all right? And some of us do this naturally, like if every time you're gonna pick a child up, I'm the provider's hands, but my body is the child. You're gonna take their arms before you pick them up to change their diaper, and you're gonna go up, up, and then you pick her up. That's a touch cue to say, okay, you're gonna go flying through the air, I'm picking you up, and we're going over the changing table right now. But that's respectful, because you give them a warning. We're gonna go up. You ready to go up? And then you pick the child up and you go. That's a touch cue. And a definition of a touch cue is provided in your slides. Here's a couple examples, but it's infinite possibilities, all right? A touch cue consists of a tactile contact made in a consistent manner. There's that word, it's one of my favorite words. And you make the cue directly on the learner's body. Like I said, adults' hands touch the body. The cue is on the learner's body to tell the learner what it is you as the partner are going to do. I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to tie your shoe. I'm going to put your AFO on. I'm going to put your glasses on. You know, touch cue could be here, glasses, and then you put the kid's glasses on. But you as the adult touch the kid's head, glasses, and then you help put the glasses on, whatever it is. The touch cues made consistently on the learner's body to say, hey, here's what's going to happen now. Oh, and that helps teach anticipation, right? It helps teach predictability. It helps reduce startle, reduce challenging behavior, because I know what's going to happen. If you didn't give me this cue and you're going to start putting my glasses on me, chances are I feel this stuff coming at me. I'm going to jerk my head and you're going to poke me right in the eye with the temple of my glasses. That's startling. That's scary. You cue me, and over time I learn, so that when you cue me, you put my glasses on me, I'm cool with it. I'm not going to hurt myself, and I'm going to cooperate with you, right? Touch cues, fantastically important. Talk. Again, if hearing ability is uncertain, or if a kid has been diagnosed with a hearing loss, it is critical that you implement multimodal communication. Use unaided communication, you use gesture, you use manual sign, you use tactile sign, you use aided communication forms like a talker, an iPad, a switch, a speech generating button, all these kinds of things. Because if you don't know how well a kid hears, or so many little kids have inconsistent hearing because of ear infections, you got to get the information in there somehow, right? And so here is the second opportunity for me to talk to you about a handout I provided. You have a gesture 16 by 16. Your copy does not look like this. I gave you a copy of a form that Amy Weatherby out of Florida created, that by 16 months of age, typically developing kids should know 16 gestures. This is 9 months. I guess I should have labeled that. Kids give things and shake their head. 10 months, they should reach and raise their arms. 11 months, you can read it. This is typical development. This is part of talk, because talk, as I said when we first started, talk is speech, talk is gesture, talk is sign, all right? You got to talk. You model these gestures, you accept these gestures, you shape these gestures and teach these gestures. Again, this goes back to the study I did with Lisa, and we taught gestures to kids. It was great. Lisa will remember this one story. One thing a kid learned how to do was raise up his hand, and in the process, his dad ended up buying him a cow at an auction because the kid learned this gesture independently. The kid with deaf blindness wasn't a preschooler, but it's a great story, so I had to share that with you. Gestures are so powerful. I don't think we do enough with them. I'm a big believer in gestures. I'll talk with you about gestures forever and ever and ever. All right. So I don't think it's important that we say, oh, we have to teach these 2 gestures first. And we can't go to this one till they learn the 9-month gestures. No, that's not what I'm saying. But I think if you are trying to teach a gesture to a child with deafblindness and you don't know where to start, don't start here. That typically developing kids don't learn that till they're 15 months old. If you're trying to teach a first gesture, start with something up here, right? So generally use this for sequence, but it's not restrictive. All right. Wait. That's what this says. Just wait. Don't do the verbal diarrhea thing. Allow kids time to process what you say, what you sign, what you gesture. Just slow down. Just wait. Don't talk too much. And that's so hard. It's so hard. If we had all the time in the world, I would sit here and have you wait for me for 30 seconds and you'd be ready to pull your hair out. Because 30 seconds seems so long. You want to provide opportunities that allow that child to initiate. We are great at teaching kids how to respond to things. So many of us are not so great at giving kids opportunities to be the initiators of communication. And then to create that signal dictionary, like we looked at previously with the in-home stuff, you can do gesture dictionaries and input dictionaries, and they're so powerful. So if you want more information about that, again, those are topics for another day, but they're great. And you had a little taste of that with the previous slide.
Hey, Susan,
Yeah,
I just wanted to add a couple quick things about that last slide.
I can get a drink.
When you're talking about initiation, a lot of times that is all about you waiting. I mean, if you wait and don't prompt, they may very well provide you with something that they're initiating with. And the other one is that gesture dictionary. We use something like that or very similar to that or exactly like that for all kinds of kids with all types of communication. It has become something that we really use a lot with our TA. And part of it is because of the consistency. Even when teams have thought they were being consistent, I've gone in and observed and they were doing a touch cue, but the touch cue wasn't the same between two team members. It was close, just not exact. And you can pass that on. So let's say you're a First Steps provider and this child's getting ready to go to school. All of that information is a gift to that next team member.
Thank you, Lisa. All those excellent. Yes, 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 and yes. Thank you. We love those dictionaries. So I appreciate your contributing that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, keep going. General guidelines for facilitating communication, facilitating talking. Integrate communication into all activities. Talk in all forms. That means talk with your mouth, talk with your hands, talk with your body, talk with your facial expression, talk with sign. But not in terms of overload. To provide meaning for actions. Use key words for meaningful interaction. Pardon me, for key activities, key people, key events. Utilize what the child seems to prefer to do. I was working last month with a kiddo who has identified with deafblindness, but he has some vision. And so the team was wanting to use, he's a first grader and he's pretty sharp little cookie. And the team was wanting to use in large print and get him to read, but the font is like 72 or something. And he could see that and he could do that, but he didn't like it. They had introduced him to Braille and he was all about Braille and he wanted to use Braille, and the family was freaking out because they didn't want him to use Braille because it was a more restrictive access, but he was into Braille. So it's like, maybe we need to follow his lead and teach him to read. If our goal is to teach him to read a book independently right now, maybe we need to follow what he's saying. He's screaming at us, I don't like these letters that are this big that I have to move the magnifier like this. I like this Braille thing, and we need to listen. Okay. Label things, you do that. Teach concepts, provide turn taking, let kids make choices and honor those choices. I'll bet you every one of us on this call, I'll include myself, you offer chocolate milk and white milk. And you know, Lisa, I'm going to pick on you. You know, Lisa loves chocolate milk, right? And you don't always have chocolate milk. So you say, Lisa, do you want chocolate milk or white milk? And she picks white milk. Then by gosh, by golly, give her the white milk because that's what she chose. Don't go, oh, honey, are you sure? I know you like chocolate. Here's the chocolate milk. No, don't do that. She picked white. Hey, learn the consequence of your action. Natural consequence, you picked white, here you go. What are you teaching about choice making if you don't honor the choice the child makes? I've done it wrong. I'll bet you've done it wrong too. So don't do that. Let's learn from our mistakes. Transport, we're almost done. Van Dyke proposed those coactive strategies, right? We looked at those. Move together, touch with consistent verbal cues, nonverbal cues, joint motor activities. He also, as a second stage of his intervention strategy, he talks about this thing called resonance. And my guess is, I think we had a TVI on the call last time, or maybe you've worked with a TVI, teacher of the visually impaired, that has used a resonance board. Maybe you've worked with a PT or an OT that has used a resonance board to feel the vibrations, to be rocking and feel the vibrations of loud music or other vibratory activity. Resonance requires close physical contact with a teacher and a young child. The teacher initiates the movement and then stops it to see if the child will continue it. It's not this constant paired, like spooned interaction like coactive strategies is. Resonance starts to get some separation physically and can be a give and take, stop and start with actions that affect the immediate environment. This is a fascinating concept too. And I think actually mirrors what lots of people naturally do with young children in preschool environments. Coactive movement is an expansion as well as an extension of resonance. This just gives you some examples about gradually you physically increase the distance between the teacher and the child. For example, a teacher and a young child could pick up toys and put them in a finished box at the same time, side by side, instead of hand under hand picking up the toys and put them in the box. The next step is, well, I'll be here and pick them up, and you be here and pick them up, and we can each pick them up, and we'll put it in together side by side. So we'll do it together, but not like spooned together or hand under hand. It's just that separation for more independence. You want to, when you're working with preschoolers who experience deaf blindness, you want to engineer the physical classroom environment in such a way as to reduce clutter, reduce obstruction to movement. It's got to be safe, right? You want to create designated spaces for specific activities. I'm betting you do that anyway, but that will especially help kiddos who have dual sensory loss. The only thing you might do differently in this regard for kids with dual sensory loss than what you do with your other preschoolers would be to add some different labels, not instead of, but in addition to the labels. Like if you label those spaces with colors, maybe you need to label those spaces with textures for a kid whose visual abilities are compromised. Or maybe if you label them with words, you need to label them with a sound toy that when the kid goes to that space, that toy makes that sound. You're going to enhance the identification of that space. This is one of the most creative things I've seen a lot of teachers do is you can use textures on the floor of a classroom to guide the kids' movement to key spaces. Like if the kids come in the door and then they're supposed to go over to this morning circle for the opening activities, have carpet squares taped down to the floor to take the kid to that meeting space. Or if there's a relaxation corner where there's a bean bag that this kid loves because it allows the kid to relax, put super bright red painter's tape, if the kid can see it all, to lead the kid to the bright red, follow the bright red tape to the bean bag. Or use vinyl tiles for key locations. You can use cues, and now painter's tape comes in all kinds of colors, which is great for us. So think about how you can facilitate movement around the classroom independently with texture and other things. Tangibles. This is our last element for on-site preschool intervention. And this gives me a chance to talk about the third handout that I've given you today. It's the one that I've called Hearing Reminders. This is just through the years I've created a sheet. And the next one's, next slide, Visual Reminders. Just tried to give you some examples of things that I think are generally applicable to your intervention with kids, period. School age kids as well as preschoolers, babies, infants, because auditory accommodations are so important. Select positions for the child and the teacher strategically, and you go, oh, we do that, we do that. Well, be aware, because I've worked with so many kids that have differential hearing loss. Maybe they have a mild hearing loss on the right, a profound hearing loss on the left, and here's the teacher over here, and here's all the other kids in the class over here. It's like, no, go over here, because this is the side she hears better from. And you go, well, yeah, I would do that if I knew. I know that. It's so easy to lose sight of those kinds of things. Position yourself and the other kids in the class strategically. Consider the acoustics. My guess is you've done some of that with, you put sound absorbing things on the walls, or you might have an FM system in the classroom. Manage sound to noise ratio. This is so important. It's one of the reminders on the sheet. Sound involves auditory stimuli to which you want the kid to be able to pay attention, and noise is just all the other auditory stimuli going on in the environment. This ratio is really hard to control in a preschool classroom. It's hard to manage, but it is so important because it's like auditory clutter. It's really important. For a kid who has a pronounced vision loss, your auditory accommodations really have to be raised up. They have to be heightened, just as tactile accommodations have to be heightened. We really have to be aware and accommodate the kids accordingly. So I hope that hearing reminder sheet might be of use to you or your colleagues or some families. I wasn't going to read over it with you because you've got it and you can look at it. If you have questions, you can ask when we get to the final question period. But these are some of the most important things in my opinion. And I've tried to give you some other things that I feel I've learned through the years of my experience in teaching and in coaching. The next one you can anticipate is visual accommodation. And the last handout with which I provided you is a sheet of vision reminders. These are two of my favorites. Contrast is a friend and glare is an enemy. I think this is true with kids in general. Lots of kids experience learning disabilities in school. Glare is my own enemy. Try to read your cell phone outside in the bright sun, right? Doesn't really work too well. Glare is an enemy. Contrast is a friend. We need to control classroom lighting. My guess is some of you've put fabric under your fluorescent lights because they're so crazy. Fluorescent lights could kill you because they buzz too, right? Fluorescent lights are enemies for all kinds of reasons. Think about targeted lighting. Think about the colors you use, especially for kids who might have a cortical vision impairment. I talked about that 2 weeks ago. Color can make a significant difference. Think about that. The size of the tangibles you use is critical. The way you arrange them. Some kids are so sneaky. If you have 3 things out there, they're going to pick the one that's closest to them, or they're going to pick the one that's closest to their left hand. So you mix them up and you see they're always pick the one that's closest to their left hand. That's not working for you. So you need to come up with a different arrangement where you put them in a vertical line so they're all close to the left hand or whatever. You need to think about size, position, spacing, arrangement of the visual stimuli you use in your instruction. And for a kid with a pronounced hearing loss, think about using visual clues as labels, tactile cues as labels. It's really important. So we'll finish an object cue. We talked about touch cues a little bit ago. And an object cue is an object or a part of an object that is used to refer to a person, place, thing, activity, another noun, right? And the purpose is to make that thing more concrete, to support turn taking, to support conversation. And if you use these object cues, it can help to also develop joint tactile attention. And you see, you might have this as a glass, as half a glass from the side. You might use this as a glass, which is the rim from the top. With the same child, you do not use these two things. You pick one for glass for each child, but it may be for one child who can see, this is going to be your object cue for glass. For a kid who's totally blind, this might be the cue for glass, because what that child experiences first when they have a drink, and if it's a sippy cup, then you'd use that, okay, is the rim of the glass. Or as kids get older, they learn to put their fingers inside the rim to know when it's full. So it's whatever aspect of the object the kid encounters first. Use object cues in the same way you use tactile cues to support communication interaction. And just as we talked about, you can use touch cues to say, this is mama, this is daddy, this is grandma. You can use personal identifiers, which would be an object to say, this is Miss Emily, and I'm your TVI, and I'm here to read with you right now. She always wore this sequin bracelet, okay? And the little one, this is a real little preschooler with deafblindness, she always feels this bracelet. Then she knows who this person is, and she knows what they're going to do because she feels this bracelet. And now she does it with just a little bit of cueing, but initially through hand under hand, they had to teach her to feel this. And then it was, here's Miss Emily, and here's the book we're going to read. But it becomes the identifier of this person and this activity. They're great. As kids get older, tangibles can be used as calendar systems. We're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. And when you get done, you take this off and put it in the basket. Then you go do this and take it off and put it in the basket. Then we're going to do this. You take it off and put it in the basket. These are some that generally wouldn't be used with preschoolers because they're more sophisticated, but I wanted to show you just one picture of how sophisticated they can get. And the purpose is to teach kids to anticipate that there's an order to things. There's a structure to things. I can predict this, then this, then this. It also helps kids learn to understand how time passes. And I don't know about you, but I don't need somebody to teach me that time passes. I know that all too well. And you can start with something just as simple as one or two things and this finish box, but they can become very, very sophisticated. And that is the end of my suggestions to you for preschool intervention. The next several slides, and I'm just going to talk for 1 or 2 quick minutes, Lisa, are about routines. And we did provide this here at the end. I think, as you'll remember, I said at the very beginning, I doubted we would do this together. I tried to create this section of the PowerPoint to be more standalone, and it walks through why do you use routines? Oh, to organize the world, to provide them with supports for learning and to help them develop memory, to help them build trust. You can use them in NICU, home, and on-site programs. You can read through these things, but I have the elements of routines, what you can develop routines for, the skills to embed in them, the importance of wait time. So I think we're going to stop together, and we'll allow you guys to ask questions if you have them. If you don't, I can walk through the routine slides with you if you want me to, but I think they're standalone, and I think questions might be more in order. Lisa, are you okay with that?
I am fine with that. I did want to add one thing, as you're looking at the routines, make sure when you're working with the child, as much as possible, and sometimes I know there are extenuating circumstances, but as much as possible, make sure you have that kiddo help you with the beginning, the middle, and the end. If you have to go get things, then let's go together. Or there are so many times where something happens and it's because that child doesn't understand where the materials came from, or they don't understand where things go. Things just appear in front of them. And so just try to make sure that you do all parts of that.
Excellent. They have to have every routine, whether it's an in-home routine, an in-school routine, it has to have a clear beginning. We're going to do this now. And we're going to get the stuff we need. And it's got the middle where we do it. And now it's done. It's over. It's finished. So we have to get that done. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. Absolutely. What other questions do folks have for us?
I don't have any in the chat box yet.
I see one. It said, last time I
Oh.
mentioned smell can be helpful. Any tips for how to incorporate this into our interventions? It's a tricky one, Kirby. I guess my first word would be carefully. Sometimes smells can be very overpowering, particularly to little children. Particularly to kids who don't see and don't hear well. If they're just overwhelmed with a scent, they may not be able to process through anything else. Like again, I would say to you, if you walk into a room where there's been burned popcorn recently, I don't know about you, but I can't focus on much else because I can't get the burned popcorn out of my head. That's a little bit lame, but it's a little bit accurate. Where I think smell can be helpful, with a caveat to be careful, is if you as a person always use the same hand lotion, or you as a person always wear the same cologne, or you as a person always use the same lip balm, a flavored lip balm or something, those can support your identification with a child. My concern about using that as your sole identity with a child, what if they quit making that perfume? What if you run out of hand lotion? Then you go there to work with the child and you don't have that smell about you. So I think it can be a cologne, a hand lotion, a lip balm, any kind of body lotion, body powder, soap, scented soap. If you always use it, that can enhance your identity with a child. But if you run out of that product or they discontinue that product, pardon me, but you're screwed. And it's a real difficult situation if that's what you've relied on solely. Sometimes it's more reliable if you can use smell in environments, particularly if you're working in the child's home. You could probably work with the family to have certain kind of smells in that child's bedroom, maybe in the family bathroom, or in the part of the home where you always do intervention with the child. And you could do that with different kinds of room deodorizers, or like if it's a young child, with baby powder. My goodness, we all know how strong an odor baby powder can have. And that's going to say to that child, here's your room, here's Susan's room. And you talk about it. And when you first enter the zone where it smells, you talk about it. But I don't find any benefit in saying, do you smell that? Do you go, because you can't do that for the child. And smell is such an abstract concept, but it's when that smell hits that kid's senses, then you label your room or whatever. That's the best I have to suggest. I have heard other people working with like different kinds of pairs of tubes of things with different smells in them, and you try to match the two and all that. And I think that can have some use with older children, but with little kids, I don't recommend it as a go-to because smell is so abstract.
Susan, can I add something?
Please, 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 yes.
And again, I would say the same thing you did. Carefully, these things were done with some pretty extensive kind of research to make sure that the smells were not overpowering or something the child had a reaction to. But I've had a couple of folks do things with a little bit of choice making for children who really responded and really liked smells. And for kids who were able to eat, they would give them choices of different, kinds of food based on the smell of them, and kind of then give them a little taste. And the other one was children who really enjoyed both the smell and like a massage, kind of a light massage. They use different scents of lotions for that.
Oh, those are two great great examples, Lisa. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. That's great. Thank you. What else do we have, folks? We got 3 whole minutes here.
They're a quiet group, but they hung in.
They're here. I see we've still got good attendance. There's my name, there's my email, there's my phone number. Use them if you want. I also know that Lisa can help you with a lot of the things.
So, I mean, you still have a couple of minutes if you want to ask a question. I do want to tell you all that I will be sending another email out with the link to the eval and the post test. And once you complete those, you should get your certificate in an email.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you all again for hanging in, because you really have stayed, and I appreciate that. Many of you came back after last week, 2 weeks. So thank you for your dedication to the kids whom you teach and for joining us. Lisa, I want to thank you for this opportunity, and it's been great to work with you again. Like I've told the group more than once, we started this stuff 20 years ago, so it's really fun to come around and go full circle. So, and I also want to thank the interpreters. I haven't had the opportunity to really focus, pay attention today, but I'm glad there were 2 of you so you could share the load of trying to keep up with how fast I talk. So thank you. Thanks to both of you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
You are 2 great interpreters. Thank you.
Yay.
Back to you. Wind it up.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else. I did want to kind of put a teaser out there that I think Susan will be back closer to fall. So keep an eye out on our website if you're really interested in doing some other things with Susan. I think she's coming to see us in person.
Hope so. So,
Okay, I think that's it. If nobody has anything else, thank you, Joy, for telling us how much you appreciate the information. We appreciate hearing it. So,
yeah, I would say if any of you are able to use anything either that Lisa and I've shared with you in these 2 webinars, or something that this prompted you to think about on your own, and it seems to be effective with a kid or family, share it with Lisa. Let her know. She needs to know that kind of stuff for her annual reports and to justify, you know, the professional development, the project sponsors. So please, please, please shoot her an email and say, hey, we use the dictionary that you talked about, or, you know, please let her know. She needs that information.
I really do. Anytime I can get anything where I can show that it's being used or that there was a result with a child, that is perfect information to pass along to the federal government. So,
Absolutely. So they'll give her more money for the next year. Okay.
all right. Well, you guys have a great afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon.
Hope so. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your attention.
Thanks, Susan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.